Good morning, and I'd like to begin by saying how delighted I am to present this keynote address on the occasion of the 17th Difference Makers Leadership Conference. 17 is quite a number, and I would commend the promoter, the founder of the Joshua Leadership Project for being steadfast and being fervent in his dreams. I do understand that I'll be sharing this podium today with great minds, Nigerians of great repute. And I do hope that you will take advantage of this great gathering of men, because our desire really is to build strong men, strong women, and we're united in that fervent belief that this nation can indeed be better than we currently see it. It is, for me, a challenge and is a privilege. And I hope that at the end of this presentation, you will have picked one or two things that will help you on your journey to leadership. Second point to make is that I have prepared a presentation. I just didn't want to speak off the cuff because I wanted every detail of my presentation to sink in. And I do hope that at the end of the 40 minutes, which have been allotted, again, you will have benefited from my contributions at this conference. And so I welcome you to the 2020 Difference Makers Conference. Our world has never needed difference makers as it does today. And the facts are obvious. Therefore, your participation today means that you are one of the few that have been prepared and are being prepared on a continuous basis to make a difference in a world whose health systems, even if we have to pick the incidence of the COVID-19 pandemic, to make a difference in this world. You are going to be leading in the search for a new thinking, a fresh beginning, and I hope that you will understand the enormity of the burden being heaped on you today as you go through this conference. We are here just for emphasis under the auspices of the Joshua Leadership Project, and in its core mandate, chose to raise effective godly leadership that serves as a company of change makers in every sphere of our society: businessmen, professionals, and church ministries. And we can all agree that change is most needed when things have gone out of the norm. In more ways than one, therefore, this is a bold effort to create an oasis of sanity, in quotes, amidst the confusion and delusion that prevails in our world today. This is indeed the pivotal moment for the change makers to arise and be counted. I hope you are ready for the challenge ahead. Let me remind us, therefore, of the core values of the Joshua Leadership Project. These are the things that motivated me to say yes when I was invited to speak at this conference as a keynote speaker. The first is excellence in leadership. Second is godly character. And the third is selfless contribution in leadership. A bit of historical context. This project was planted in 2004, and like a mustard seed, it is now an oak tree. Difference Makers, one of the 4 platforms deployed, was specifically created for assessing knowledge and inspiration that prepare participants for relevance and contribution in society. Today, I stand solidly with the founder of the project, my dear brother, Dr. Benjamin Dike, and I want to once again congratulate him on his selfless service to humanity. Why am I excited? My excitement today is born out of the fact that what we face collectively as a global committee, even though it seems unprecedented, also provides an opportunity for us to adapt, arise, and advance the cause of humanity. I am convinced that we have in this audience, here in this room, and for those that are listening from wherever you may be, the men and the women that can lead that charge for a better tomorrow. So the theme for this year, once again, transformation, adapt, arise, advance. Setting out. Let me start by examining the key word in our theme, transformation. And I'd like to draw inspiration from the Holy Bible. Romans chapter 12, verse 2 says, "But be transformed by the renewing of your mind." B, a new order, known sequence. The significant problems that we face today cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. I'm sure we're all very familiar with this quote. By way of reminder, this is Albert Einstein speaking to us. Einstein, as we know, was a Nobel laureate and one of the world's most influential scientists of his time. And he captured every leader's need of the moment in that quote. Let me repeat that quote. The significant problems we face today cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. Therefore, it will take increased and deeper investment in research to unravel the pathology and the epidemiology of the COVID-19 virus. But in the meantime, since the world must go on, leaders must have to manage their organizations in the face of the current uncertainties. The argument is raging whether cities or countries or states should be thrown open today so that we can return to status quo with the fear of rising cases of infected patients. It is clear, however, that the more economic activities are shuttered, the bigger the consequences will be on the global economy. And the harder it will also be to restart eventually when the dust settles. But clearly, returning to life as we knew it then will lead to even greater rate of infestations and the attendant loss of lives. Leaders are therefore left with the dilemma of choosing between saving lives and saving livelihoods. According to the World Bank, the COVID-19 pandemic has triggered the deepest global recession in decades. While the ultimate outcome is still uncertain, the pandemic will result in contractions across the vast majority of emerging, frontier, and developed markets. Of course, you know Nigeria is in the frontier market. So it will also do lasting damage to labor productivity and global output. The immediate policy priorities are to alleviate the human costs and attenuate the near-term economic losses. But once the crisis abates, it will be necessary to reaffirm a credible commitment to sustainable policies and undertake the reforms necessary to buttress long-term prospects. Let's do a deeper dive on the statistics so that we know what challenges currently face the globe. Speaking of sub-Saharan Africa, economic activity in this region is on course to contract by 2.8% in 2020. And this will be the deepest on record, by the way. Our economy, that is Nigeria, is expected to shrink by as high as 3.2%, again in 2020. And this is on the back of the collapse in oil prices, as we saw in April and May of 2020. South Africa, which is the second biggest economy in Africa, behind Nigeria, is forecast to contract by even a higher factor, 7.1% this year. And you can imagine the ripple effect it will have in that region, even as we contemplate the crisis we face in West Africa. And so, economic activity amongst commodity importing economies is expected to shrink also this year despite the lower oil prices, as international travel restrictions weigh on tourist visits. Industrial commodity exporters' GDP is similarly projected to contract in 2020 as domestic disruptions are compounded by low prices for oil and metals. How do you summarize this position I've painted now? It is the fact that no nation, no territory will be spared of the fallout of the pandemic. And so the world needs a collective response. And whatever we agree today will have global implications. So you must think not as Nigerian leaders. You must think not as Nigerian youth. You must think not as Nigerian entrepreneurs, but as global leaders who have been called to fashion a response to the crisis we face today. So from this prognosis, it is clear that there definitely will not be any easy answers. So where do we go from here? Let's examine the first point, adapt. Again, I want to quote Charles Darwin. It is not the strongest of species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. So you pick the word adapt. I wanted to pull out that fact. And Charles Darwin obviously couldn't have been wrong when he said, you must adapt. You don't have to be smart. You don't have to be too strong, but you must adapt to changing situations. So the ability to adapt to changes has long been identified to be at the core of our continued existence as human species. And by extension, our society and organizations must adapt, otherwise we will fail. It's a continuous state of change. It is the key survival skill for living in a world characterized by volatility, uncertainty, chaos, and ambiguity, which is what we call VUCA. We live in a super-connected world where changes in one end of the globe almost instantly lead to dramatic consequences at the opposite end of the earth. Ever-improving technological advancements keep the world together as a true global village. The internet, easily accessible via computers and mobile devices, bring us closer to the rest of the world in a twinkle of an eye. Social media have also democratized news. So we no longer need mainstream media, or what you call MSM, to have access to what is going on in any part of the globe. Most news items now break on social media first, where the MSM picks up the lead to create their own news items. When the Great Depression hit American shores in the early 20th century, as a result of the stock market crash of October 1929, sending Wall Street into panic and wiping out millions of investors, it took a while for the shocks to reverberate across the then industrialized world. This was in the early 20th century. But that was because the world was not as connected as it is today. So we are speaking of a world that is even more connected, far beyond what was envisaged in the early 20th century. So we are nowhere close to what we are seeing today. But the economic turmoil, just to contrast it with the events of the early 20th century, the economic turmoil that followed the COVID-19 pandemic was felt instantly for emphasis across the globe. From international airlines and shipping routes, which got shortened, leading to global logistics and supply chain disruptions, bringing everything to a standstill. Many countries experienced an immediate shortage of general goods, and some resorted to hoarding even basic things as basic as toilet rolls in order to survive. Manufacturers themselves, who had expected inputs from across the world, had to shut down their factories as materials failed to arrive from far-flung places, largely China, which today is nearly 35% of manufacturing hub of the globe. So you can see the concentration of manufacturing and the power of China. And so when the crisis hit China in Wuhan, every nation was impacted. That tells you the interconnectedness of the globe today, contrary to what we had in the early 20th century, where America was isolated and the crisis affected them only. So trading companies, for those that are importers, for those that source inputs from across the globe, were also affected because they ran down their inventory and couldn't replenish, even if they had the cash flow. Of course, we know that banks were also challenged, and banks began to tighten their risk appetite and began to streamline their availment to obligors and to their customers. So it was a shrinking of the space, which is why fresh thinking is important. And so today, what the world is saying is perhaps we need to rethink globalization as a tool for economic development. It was novel in the early 90s, globalization. But now I'm sure we've heard inshoring instead of offshoring. America is saying bring back the factories, bring back the job, bring back the factories to America. And Nigeria, as you know, we had to shut down our borders. So the response speaks to the enormity of the crisis we face as the globe. Now, let me give you some information on how this has impacted corporates, so you know that this truly is not something that is far-flung. So we have seen renowned global brands like Hertz Rental, J.C. Penney Stores, Neiman Marcus, etc., declare bankruptcy. These are brands that were in the top 500 global brands across the world. But how come they filed bankruptcy? Indeed, another name that should remind us of the crisis we face is Wirecard, which is a German fintech. And just early June of this year, Wirecard collapsed, with creditors owed about 3.5 billion euros. Think about that. 3.5 billion euros owed creditors, but they had to declare bankruptcy. So many companies are surviving just because their governments have given bailouts just to keep the workers still on their beats. Otherwise, it would have been worse than we are painting. Therefore, with all these facts I have given you, seeing that no nation is immune from the crisis, as leaders, we must therefore take lessons on adaptability from these ongoing events. Many activities we used to think were too critical to our existence have been scaled down hugely, and some have been completely cut off in a bid to effectively manage the challenging situation. While some organizations already invested heavily in tools that will allow for business continuity, even from remote locations, others were caught flat-footed as they were not prepared at all for the crisis that hit us. Adaptability, therefore, means having a long-term scenario planning effort to predict the future with an eye for worst-case outcomes. The future of work and work from home, or WFH, work from home, used to be academic concepts only discussed within the confines of university classes and conferences. But that future is suddenly here with us, without notice. And it simply means that this black swan event has consequences that are existential. There are companies that will not survive it. There are nations that will not survive it. As you know, Lebanon is bankrupt. This is a July second week news. So I'm not talking 5 years ago. In 2020, July, Lebanon has declared that they are unable to service their obligations. And therefore, the bonds have become junk, useless. And that tells you that proactivity, adaptability, very important. Now, for most of our regular work and our meetings and conferences, we need not be physically co-located to have meaningful engagements. And why not? This conference would have been physical, I'm sure you know. But now, we're all connecting via YouTube, via the other platforms, just to listen to these presentations. That's the power of change. And so with tools like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, Google Docs, etc., we have adapted to productive work without leaving the confines of our homes. Being adaptive, therefore, also means having to deal with extreme unknowns. Mark those words, extreme unknowns and dangers which are ahead. And we must be careful to innovate and not to run back into our comfort zones of the past. Most times, I have to warn, what worked in the past may not be enough to survive the new challenges that are emerging. To adapt, therefore, is to build resilience, not just on the long short, or not just on the short term, rather, but by taking a holistic, long-term view of our lives and organization. To adapt means putting our business models in a permanent changeover mode, ready for activation at an instant. One sure way of building resilience is by conducting analysis that seeks to define and enumerate the ways and the extent to which an external disruptive event like this pandemic may impact negatively our standard operations. Taken together with risk assessment, this impact analysis will go a long way to ensure business continuity. For emphasis, the end goal will always be developing stepwise outline of actions that must be activated periodically to help us weather the storms and survive whatever disruptions that we may encounter. Let's speed up to the next point, which is arise. You must have noticed that I have a penchant for going back to the Bible. So I'll start again by looking at the Bible. What does the Bible say about arise? Let's go to Isaiah chapter 60, and I'll read verses 1 to 3. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people, but the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. Nancy Cohen wrote in her recent piece in the Harvard Business Review, quote, I have studied courageous leaders for 2 decades, and through this work, I know that real leaders are not born. The ability to help others triumph over adversity is not written into their genetic code. They are indeed made. They are forged in crisis, unquote. The world as we know it now is in deep crisis. You only need to flip open your phones or watch the news to be inundated with news flashes of turmoil from across the globe. But this is not the time to throw in the towel. This is not the time either to hand in our tools and bow our heads in despair or give up the fight. No. We are tougher than that. We are bolder than that. This is the time to arise. And like the scripture says, as I quoted, to shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord is risen upon you. Upon you, participants, upon you. The glory of the Lord is risen upon you. And you are made for times like this. That is why this call is very important. This is the time to find inspiration, even in the midst of challenges. In the midst of despondency, this is the time to remain focused and to say, yes, we can deliver despite the challenges. This is the time to dig in to your reserves of energy. This is the time to find creative ways to solve the challenges we face today as humanity. It is not the time to sink into that place of resignation. History is replete with leaders who rose to the occasion when distress and disaster struck. When the rest of the world was confused and grief-stricken, they spoke in clarity. It's important you understand this. When the rest of the world was confused and grief-stricken, they spoke in clarity to steady the hearts of feeble ones. So from amongst us, there are feeble ones, but let someone arise and speak to encourage and motivate. That is what we want. And we are building that oasis of sanity, that out of the 200, let 12 arise, let 10 arise, let 1 arise. You don't need a multitude to lead. And as we say, if you must lead the orchestra, you must back the crowd. You must back the crowd and lead the orchestra. They want to see you conduct them. How do they want to move? You are the inspiration. You are the leaders that the world is looking up to today, to arise and point the way, point out the direction we should follow. So when darkness seemed to obscure the paths of men, the leaders held out a torch, and lit the way for others to walk through. You may not see the path, but you have a view of the future. You may not know the end state, but begin with the end in mind, that I want to achieve a better society. And if you are prayerful, the Lord will guide you to the right path. But you must be ready to point the torch and let the light shine. Now we move on. Let us consider one profound example just to underscore the point I'm making, that one person can make the difference. Barcelona, Spain, 1999. This was the era of the Spanish flu. I'm sure you're all privy to it. You all understand what it means. The Spanish flu that ravaged Europe at the time, particularly Spain. The world was already clamoring for change. How do we resolve this problem? It was spreading just as the COVID-19 virus was spreading at the time. And the world was wearied by the impacts of the war. And businesses were closing. Gloom filled everywhere. There was almost like nothing to do again. And the last thing on the minds of everybody was starting a business. How do you contemplate starting a business in the midst of Spanish flu that was ravaging the globe? But amidst that uncertainty, a great mind, Isaac Caruso, decided to rise. He was disturbed by the faces of malnourished children, including his own son, Daniel, who often suffered intestinal ailments due to the general poor hygiene of the time. So he began to thinking ideas that can help to ameliorate the situation. Isaac Caruso went into the production of yogurt, convinced of cultured milk's ability to nourish and strengthen children's internal bacterial flora. Naming the product after his son's nickname, Danone, he began to sell Danone yogurt to pharmacies in 1919. Remember, at the peak of the Spanish flu. A simple product, you may say, with a simple aim to improve health, rooted in one of the oldest processes known to man, which is fermentation. The business grew so rapidly in Spain and was successfully expanded across into France. Adapting the product to French tastes, he positioned the yogurt not only as a healthy product, but as that. This runaway success in France was the encouragement he needed to move the product across the Atlantic to the USA, where he continued to innovate with added layers of strawberry jam, flavors, and new tastes to win the American market. This courage to rise in a time of despondency led Danone to grow into one of the top 10 global dairy food companies today, with annual revenues in excess of 25 billion US dollars. Leaders, as we can see from this example, make routine of great problems. Let's look at the third point, which is advance. Again, let's go to the Bible as we take off. And the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry to me? Tell the children of Israel to go forward." Exodus 14, verse 15. To advance is to move forward purposefully. Purposefully. Leadership is about taking people forward and further than they would have gone on their own. We are in a period when our leaders prefer to spend more time crying over losses and missteps of previous regimes and administrations. Yet, this can cripple drive and initiative. The Israelites were ready to give up when they encountered the barrier of the Red Sea. They believed it was better to go back to Egypt than to perish in the wilderness. Tired and dejected, they began to cry until God instructed Moses to lead them forward. It is for this purpose that as leaders committed to transformation, we must continue to advance towards the uncharted territories to discover the new worlds out there. As we advance, we discover new things. As we advance, we instill hope and confidence in our team, in our organization, and our society at large. The question to pose at this time is, why is it difficult to generate the right result in organizations? Why is it difficult to generate the right momentum, the desired progress? Why is it difficult? Clearly, the leader that fulfills the criteria for leadership will deliver. So if you have a leader that is sufficiently prepared, that goes through the tutelage and understands what it means to lead, the right results will be generated. And that is what we are talking about here today. How do you get to that level where you can lead and therefore think differently, stepping out of the norm and making a change? That is the challenge we have today. So what are the criteria for leadership? I think it's better to save that answer towards the end of my presentation so that you will not forget. But let me emphasize that change begins at the end of your comfort zone. It is easier to remain in the comfort zone, but that is a deadly place to be. The comfort zone sucks you in, and you don't think that there are levels you can still aspire to because you feel you are comfortable. Whereas God can make you great, make you greater, and make you the greatest. Why do you want to stop at great, where you can be greater, where you can be the greatest? Why do you have to self-limit? That is the challenge we face today, that people get too comfortable in their zone and think there is nothing else to achieve. And those that remain in their comfort zones do not accomplish much. So to make advancements, one must try new things. You must be daring. You must be adventurous with the self-belief that you can accomplish more. You must push yourself to do what needs to be done. Never to be afraid. Never be afraid to give up the good. Go for the great, because in the end, we only regret the chances we did not take. Now, the American continent, I want to go back to that great continent. We all admire the American strength, the resilience. We all admire the character. We all admire the power of America, but it was built by people. And here's the story. What we know as American continent today is great because the European forebears dared to leave the comfort of Europe to advance into the uncharted territory of the then New World. They knew that the liberty and the pursuit of happiness they desired required making an advancement away from the old world. However, advancing will require building new skill sets. Very important. Building new skill sets. So just advancing for the sake of it without really knowing where you want to go will lead to failure and unpleasant consequences. And I think we are in good company if we listen to what Sun Tzu, the great Chinese warrior and philosopher, said. I quote, "Tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat," unquote. In his classic book on human development, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey talked about sharpening the saw as habit number 7. Leaders must seek continuous improvement and renewal professionally and personally. Renewal is the principle and the process that empowers us to move on an upward spiral of growth and change, of continuous improvement. It could be taking a very short course in a new knowledge area or going back to school altogether. It could be having a retreat to review the current state and create a new strategic focus going forward. These are the ways to build the courage to make meaningful advancement. Self-improvement, personal improvement. You must make an investment in time, make investment in resources, and commit to move yourself from where you are today, not by the effort of your company, not by the effort of your parents, but you committing to self-improve. That is the hallmark of advancement. So at the speed the world is advancing in the 4th industrial revolution, many skill sets that won in the marketplace before now have become irrelevant. That is the truth. And they have become obsolete. And no leader can make a bold advance with those skills until they are upskilled and retooled. I am aware that we have in this audience undergrads, those that are in the universities. So I'd like to address you. I have confidence that you are at the cusp of these transformations. You have the rare opportunity, just like the generation that left the farms for the new industries of the 19th century. You have the opportunity to design your own paths that will lead you into a greater future. You don't have the privilege of time. You don't have the luxury of time. Time is not waiting for you. This is the time to make the difference. This is the time to launch your own boat. This is the time to get onto the seas and ride the wave. The opportunities are out there, and fortune certainly favors the bold. In closing, because I see I have taken about nearly 40 minutes, let me try and close within the time allotted to me. I leave you with the words of the great master, Jesus Christ. And he said to us in John chapter 16, verse 33, "These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world." That is the assurance we have. But I made a promise I was going to give you the criteria for leadership, so this is the time. And I want to give the criteria. Over the years, scholars have tried to improve and build on the 4 C's of leadership. Today, I have 10 to share with you. And I'm hoping that in your quiet moment, you can think out 2 other C's. So we have a dozen C's of leadership. The first is character. Onto character, add competence. Onto competence, add credibility. And to that, add capacity, to which you must add courage and consistency and compassion and creativity. And then you also must add collaborative mindset. And finally, communication with sincerity. Let me repeat. Character, competence, credibility, capacity, courage, consistency, compassion, creativity, collaborative or collegial mindset, and communication with sincerity. So finally, my friends, be reminded that everything that is happening today was foretold. We have been given the charge to arise and lead with the confidence of an overcomer. And on that note, I once again welcome you to the 2020 conference and wish all of us very engaging and fruitful conversations. Thank you very much.